Fear is not something you were born with. The infant comes into the world with only two fears: fear of falling and fear of loud noises. Every other fear, every single trembling hesitation, every anxious thought about failure, rejection, poverty, or criticism, these are acquired. And what the mind has learned, the mind can unlearn. Fear is a liar dressed as a teacher. It whispers limitations in your ear and convinces you they are wisdom. It builds invisible walls around your potential and calls them safety. But those walls were never real. They were built by repetition, by hearing the same doubts over and over, by experiencing setbacks and turning them into permanent beliefs instead of passing moments. The average man allows fear to shape his choices, limit his desires, and steal years from his life. He does not recognize that fear has been cultivated in him by environment, by voices he respected, by failures he took too personally, by dreams he left unfinished. He feeds it daily with worry, with hesitation, with overthinking. But make no mistake, he wasn't born with this fear, he adopted it, and anything that has been adopted can be released. You may say, but I feel fear, isn't that real? No. Feeling something does not make it reality. You can feel tired and still have strength left. You can feel discouraged and still be surrounded by opportunity. You can feel fear and still be in no danger at all. The mind does not need reality to create panic. It only needs imagination, and it uses it powerfully. What you imagine consistently becomes what you believe. If you see danger around every corner, your body will react as though it's under siege, and soon fear becomes a habit. It becomes your default. You fear even when there's no reason to. You hesitate even when there's no risk. What is a habit but a repeated pattern of thought and behavior? Fear is no different. It gains strength through repetition. The man who entertains fearful thoughts daily begins to see danger where there is none, failure before he even tries, rejection before he even speaks. His imagination, which could be the engine of his success, becomes the architect of his prison. The great tragedy is not that people are afraid, it is that they believe fear is truth. They say, I am afraid, so it must be dangerous. They never stop to examine the fear. They never ask, is this real or is this conditioning? They never test the limits they've accepted. The moment they do, they begin to see cracks in the illusion. They take a small step and realize they don't fall. They speak up and realize they're not rejected. They try and realize that failure did not destroy them, it strengthened them. The illusion begins to fall apart. You cannot destroy fear by reasoning with it. Fear is irrational by nature. You destroy it by exposing it, by facing it, by proving again and again that it has no power except the power you give it. This is why fear must be treated not as a force of reality, but as a mental habit, a pattern that has gone unchallenged for too long. Habits are not broken by intention alone. They are broken by reconditioning. You replace the habit of fear with the habit of courage. You replace the habit of doubt with the habit of decision. You replace the habit of overthinking with the habit of action. And, like any habit, it takes time. It takes consistency. But the moment you recognize that fear is not your identity but your conditioning, you begin the process of breaking it. Fear thrives in darkness, in silence, in delay, in secrecy. But habits die in the light. You must bring your fear into the open, call it by name, and then confront it, not once, but daily. Each time you do, you weaken it. Each time you act in spite of it, you reinforce a new pattern. Fear loses its grip when it loses its mystery. And when you understand that fear is not a reality, but a reaction, trained, repeated, and rehearsed, you are no longer its servant. You are its master. A man without a purpose is like a ship without a rudder. Adrift, vulnerable to the winds of fear and the currents of doubt, He drifts not because he lacks strength, but because he lacks direction. The moment a man finds his definite purpose, fear begins to wither. Why? Because the mind cannot hold fear and faith in the same hand. When the mind is gripped by a definite purpose, it no longer has room for indecision, and where indecision dies, fear starves. The reason most people live in fear is not because their circumstances are so terrible, but because they have never made a firm decision about what they truly want. They hesitate, they dabble, they test the waters of 100 paths and commit to none. And in that hesitancy, fear thrives. It multiplies. It takes up residence in every crack and crevice left by indecision. It whispers, "What if?" 1,000 times a day. But the man with a definite purpose does not ask, "What if?" He says, "This is what will be." There is no power in a wandering mind. The mind must be harnessed like a lens focuses sunlight, concentrated, intense, and aimed at a single point. Without that concentration, the mind becomes a slave to distractions, fears, and external opinions. But when it is focused through the lens of a definite purpose, it becomes unstoppable. The same man who once trembled at risk, once doubted every move, now walks forward with steady feet because he knows where he is going. And when you know where you're going, fear becomes noise, not a barrier. Fear feeds on confusion. When the mind is unsure, when the heart is divided, fear gains momentum. It asks questions that cannot be answered and paralyzes action before it even begins. But definiteness cuts through confusion like a blade. It says, "I have decided. I will not look back. I will not hesitate." And that clarity is lethal to fear. It denies fear the fuel it needs to survive uncertainty. Every great achievement in the history of mankind was born from a definite purpose. The builders of empires, the creators of fortune, the inventors, the visionaries, they did not stumble forward blindly. They moved with intent. They chose a purpose and refused to retreat from it, even when faced with failure, ridicule, or difficulty. It was their clarity of purpose that made them dangerous to fear. Fear could not intimidate them because they were not standing still. They were advancing, always advancing. A man who has decided what he will give his life to has already conquered the first and greatest fear, the fear of the unknown. For most people, it is not death that scares them, but the quiet terror of never having truly lived. But a man with a definite purpose has already chosen to live. He has already chosen the terms of his existence, and that choice removes the teeth from fear because now he is not reacting to life, he is commanding it. Clarity does not mean comfort. A definite purpose does not make the road easy, but it makes the road visible. And when the road is visible, action becomes possible. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the dominance of purpose over fear. When a man's purpose is more powerful than his doubts, his fears become irrelevant. He may feel them, but he does not obey them. Definiteness of purpose builds inner momentum. It turns the mind from a passive observer into an active creator. It aligns thoughts, words, and actions in one unified direction. There is no greater weapon against fear than this alignment. When all parts of you move together, when your thoughts support your actions and your actions reinforce your beliefs, fear cannot find a foothold. It slips, it fades. The wandering mind is prey for every fear, every criticism, every imagined failure. But the mind locked on purpose is a fortress. It does not yield to passing winds. It does not surrender to opinion. It does not retreat under pressure. It holds, it fights, it advances, and every day it moves closer to its aim, fear grows weaker. Faith is the inner power that takes a man from the valley of doubt to the mountaintop of certainty. It is not born from evidence, it creates it. Faith does not wait for results before it believes. It believes and then the results appear. Fear waits for proof. faith creates proof. These two forces cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Where one lives, the other dies. And of the two, faith is the master when it is deliberately chosen and applied. Fear whispers that you are alone, that the odds are against you, that failure is inevitable. It builds its case on past disappointments and imagined dangers. But faith stands in defiance of that whisper. Faith says you are guided, you are supported, and that there is power within you greater than any obstacle outside you. Faith is not a passive hope, it is an active force. It moves the mind, it moves the body, it alters the vibration of your thoughts until you no longer tremble, you radiate. A man of fear studies his circumstances and sees reasons to quit. A man of faith studies the same circumstances and sees them as temporary, as a test, as something already on its way out. Faith is a lens. It colors how you see the world. To one man, the storm is a sign to hide. To another, it is a call to rise. The difference is not in the weather. It is in the man's belief. Faith is not the denial of facts. It is the refusal to be ruled by them. The man of faith understands that facts are only fragments of truth, and truth is always evolving. He sees beyond what is and fixes his mind on what can be. This is why faith is the antidote to fear. Because fear thrives on finality, on limitation, on fixed beliefs. Faith, on the other hand, is expansive. It opens doors fear told you were locked. It clears paths fear said were blocked. It reveals strength fear told you never had. Fear is a parasite. It cannot exist on its own. It lives only when fed by doubt, when nourished by indecision, when strengthened by a lack of belief. But faith is self-sustaining. The more you use it, the more it grows. The more you act with it, the more it confirms itself. And soon, what was once blind faith becomes knowing. You no longer just believe you can, you know you will. Fear has no answer to that kind of certainty. No man can build anything great with fear as his foundation. Fear cracks under pressure. It retreats when challenged. It freezes at the moment of decision. But faith is steady. Faith holds fast. Faith leans forward when fear leans back. Faith keeps the feet moving when the mind is unsure. And that movement, however small, is enough to break fear's grip. The beginning of every transformation starts with a single belief that change is possible, that the future can be different from the past, that you are not a prisoner of your mistakes, your upbringing, or your current condition. That belief is faith. And once it enters your mind, it begins to rewrite everything. The man who once feared rejection now believes he is worthy. The man who once feared failure now believes failure is part of the journey. The man who once feared being seen now believes he has something worth showing. All of this begins with faith. Faith is not reserved for the extraordinary. It is the tool of the ordinary man who dares to act extraordinary. It is forged in silence, strengthened by repetition, and proven through action. It does not always roar. Sometimes it is quiet, but it is constant. A steady flame that keeps burning even when the winds of fear blow hard. And as it burns, it clears the mind, strengthens the heart, and prepares the spirit for bold, unwavering movement. Fear does not thrive in the presence of movement. It survives only in stillness, in hesitation, in the moments where decision is delayed and the imagination is allowed to run wild. Fear draws its strength from inactivity. It grows in the space between thought and action, in the gap where you allow worry to multiply unchecked. But once you move, once you take a single step in defiance of that fear, it begins to dissolve. Action is fear's natural enemy. It cannot survive contact with forward motion. The great mistake men make is believing they must eliminate fear before they act. They wait until they feel ready. They wait until the fear is gone. They wait for confidence, for reassurance, for guarantees. But fear is not defeated in preparation. It is defeated in execution. You act not because you are unafraid, but so that you may become unafraid. Action precedes confidence. It precedes clarity. It precedes control. The man who waits for perfect conditions becomes a slave to fear. The man who acts despite imperfect conditions gains power over it. You will never outthink fear. You will never out-argue it. It will always have one more excuse, one more reason, one more lie to keep you still. But it cannot argue with action. Action makes fear irrelevant. It shifts the conversation from imagination to reality. And reality is never as terrifying as what the mind conjures in idle moments. When you act, you discover the truth. About the challenge, about yourself, about the limits you once believed were fixed, and in that truth, fear loses its voice. The moment you take action, you interrupt the pattern of fear. You force the brain to focus on the task instead of the terror. You engage your body, your will, your senses. You become present, and fear cannot operate in the present. It needs tomorrow, it needs someday, it needs what if. But when you are in motion, you are in now. And now is always manageable. Now is always smaller than the storm your mind was preparing for. Now is always enough. Action builds momentum. Momentum builds courage. Each small act chips away at the wall fear has built. You speak up when fear says stay quiet. You try when fear says don't bother. You take one step when fear screams for you to freeze. And suddenly you are moving. Suddenly you are not trapped in your head. You are in the world, creating, building, advancing. And once you begin, it becomes harder to stop than it ever was to start. The man who conquers fear is not the one who feels nothing, but the one who acts anyway. He understands that fear is not a stop sign, it is a signal. It says, here lies growth. It says, beyond this point you become more. And so he leans into it. Not recklessly, but deliberately. Not without thought, but without delay. For he knows that fear delayed becomes fear doubled. Every time you hesitate, you reinforce the lie that fear is in control. Every time you act, you prove that it is not. There is a force that lives in motion. It sharpens your instincts, deepens your resilience, and quiets the internal noise. The fears you analyze endlessly become irrelevant when you move. The doubts that seemed paralyzing lose their hold. You realize that fear was never a wall. It was a fog, and movement is the wind that clears it. You do not need a master plan. You do not need all the answers. You need only to begin. Begin clumsily, begin uncertainly, begin while afraid. Because the act of beginning contains a power that fear cannot match. When you are in motion, you are in command. And when you are in command, fear obeys, or it vanishes. The human mind is not fixed. It is programmable. It is not a stone, it is clay. It will become whatever it is fed most consistently. The man who understands this holds the secret to power because he knows that thought is not destiny unless it is repeated. One thought, one fear, one doubt has no real power. But when it is entertained daily, revisited hourly, spoken silently in the mind and felt in the body, it becomes a program. That is how fear becomes a system within a man. It is not born from one bad moment. It is born from many small repetitions of the same belief. Repetition is how the mind learns. A child does not learn to walk, to speak, or to behave without exposure again and again. The subconscious accepts what it hears most often, not what is most true. Truth alone is not enough. It must be repeated until it becomes louder than the lies. That is why fear has such a grip on so many. It is repeated more than faith. Doubt is replayed more than decision. Worry is rehearsed more than courage. What you water grows. What you repeat becomes real. There is no mystery in confidence. Confidence is simply the result of repeated self-belief. There is no accident in greatness. Greatness is the outcome of repeatedly seeing yourself as capable until the image becomes unshakable. Just as fear is created through unconscious repetition, power is created through conscious repetition. The question is not whether you are being programmed. The question is who is doing the programming. If you do not take control of the repetition, the world will. The voices of limitation, failure, and conformity will play in your mind by default unless you choose otherwise. The man who wishes to destroy fear must begin the process of reprogramming. He must feed the mind new instructions, not once, but continually. One affirmation will not change a life. One visualization will not destroy a habit. But daily, focused repetition rewires the brain. The mind is malleable, and repetition is the hammer. It breaks down the old walls of fear and lays the foundation for new beliefs. It is not always dramatic. It is often slow, quiet, and unseen, but it is sure. It works not because it is loud, but because it is consistent. Your mind believes what you tell it the most. It listens in the silence. It listens when you are walking, when you are resting, when you are alone with your thoughts. If fear is your dominant internal language, then fear will be your experience. But if you choose with discipline to speak faith, courage, and determination into your mind over and over, it begins to shift. You begin to hear a different voice, and that voice grows stronger with use. This is why daily practice is not a suggestion, it is a requirement. You do not brush your teeth once and call yourself clean. You do not eat one meal and call yourself nourished. In the same way, you cannot speak one truth and expect your mind to transform. You must repeat it until your nervous system accepts it as reality, until the cells in your body no longer flinch when you say, "I am powerful," but respond with agreement, until your subconscious no longer argues with your vision, but begins to cooperate with it. The man who builds a new mind does so brick by brick, word by word, image by image. He visualizes not just once, but every day. He speaks life over himself, not just in the morning, but whenever doubt rises. He does not wait until the fear is gone. He programs over it. He crowds it out. He layers over the old with the new until the old can no longer be heard. And when that new message becomes dominant, fear loses its audience. It becomes background noise in a mind too focused, too trained, too occupied with truth to listen. The change you seek begins not with an external event, but with internal repetition. The man who wins is not always the most talented, but the one most conditioned to believe he will. That conditioning is not magic. It is manual. It is earned through practice. It is chosen daily. And what is chosen daily becomes who you are. Fear is a liar, but it is a persistent one. It does not disappear because you wish it away. It dissolves because you faced it, understood it, and moved through it. You now know that fear is not the enemy. It is the indicator. It shows you where the growth is, where the edge is, where the next level begins. And it cannot survive when you bring the full force of purpose, faith, action, and repetition against it. When you choose a definite purpose, fear loses its grip. When you feed your faith, fear loses its voice. When you act, fear loses its footing. And when you repeat truth louder than the lies, fear loses its place in your mind. You are not weak. You are not stuck. You are not a victim of your emotions. You are the master of your mind. You were born with the power to choose what to believe, how to act, and who to become. So the question is no longer whether fear exists. The question is whether you will let it lead. And once you decide that fear no longer has permission to rule your life, everything changes. Your energy changes, your thoughts sharpen, your steps steady, and what once seemed impossible becomes inevitable. Because fear can only live in the shadows, and you once lit with purpose, once armed with faith, once moving with conviction, become the fire that burns it away forever.